Part 92. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 924. Most theaters will arrange some low-cost domestic supernatural films in the late-night slot. Of course, there are very few people watching the movie at this time. A man wearing light blue short sleeves is sitting alone in the theater watching the movie. It's almost like booking the venue by myself. The current domestic film review system is very strict. Other types of movies can be slightly flexible, but for horror and supernatural movies, it is equivalent to strangulation. Since the rise of Hong Kong zombie movies in the last century, there have been very few. Once again, there is a ghost movie that can make people shine. The heroine on the screen is a relatively popular young star, but her acting skills are exaggerated and helpless, as if she is constantly telling the audience that she plans to skip the scene early so that she can go home for dinner. But the man was still eating popcorn and watching with gusto. His eyes, expression, and body language showed a gesture of interest. A young man working a summer job in the theater also walked in at this time and sat down on one side to play with his mobile phone. His position was in the back row of customers, so there was no need to worry about the lighting of the mobile phone causing customers to dislike the movie. He just broke up with his girlfriend not long ago, and he couldn't say he was very sad. Now when a young man is in love, who is more sincere than the other? It's just a pity that he gave her a necklace on her birthday a while ago, even if it is only a few thousand yuan, but for considering his income, it is worth the heartache. Boredly scrolling through Weibo, he yawned slightly and rubbed his eyes. He felt a little sleepy. The young man changed into a comfortable position and planned to squint for a while. The movie was only halfway through, and there was still some time before he got off work. After sleeping for a while, the young man felt that his head suddenly felt heavy and dizzy. He opened his eyes and touched his temples, but he suddenly froze because the movie in front of him seemed a little different. There was only one picture left on the screen, that was a man wearing light blue short sleeves sitting there eating popcorn, with an empty movie theater next to him. Is this scene still in the movie? The young man hadn't realized what was going on. He was just like a person who had just woken up and was a little confused. But the next moment, the cold wind emanating from the surroundings gave him a jolt, and his mind suddenly became much clearer. Looking at the screen in front of him again, a cold sweat broke out on his back. I'm dreaming, I'm dreaming. The young man rushed out of the safe passage in a panic, but when he rushed out, he staggered. Behind the door is not the corridor of a cinema, but a barren tomb. Squeak. The door of the theater was pushed open, and Chu Zhao, who was wearing a police uniform, walked in. He did not rush to find a seat to sit down, but looked at the man who was sitting there alone, eating popcorn and watching a movie. Then he looked at the screen again. On the screen, a young man wearing uniform similar to those of a waiter was running in panic in the cemetery, occasionally tripping to the ground but getting up quickly. Look. Action. Attitude. The details and the performance are all impeccable. This acting is truly amazing. Chu Zhao took off his police hat, took the initiative to walk to the light blue short-sleeved man, and sat down. Eat. The man handed the popcorn in his hand to Chu Zhao. Chu Zhao grabbed a handful and stuffed it into his mouth. The popcorn was a little cold. Apparently, the people in the night theater didn't make fresh and hot popcorn, but just continued to sell the leftover popcorn during the day. Does it look good? The man asked Chu Zhao. It's very good looking. The acting skills are very realistic. Chu Zhao nodded. It's very immersive. Yes, there are too few people who can calm down and act well nowadays. Whether it is in TV series or movies, you can see faces with cerebral palsy everywhere, but there are still a group of people who are shy and like them. Everyone has his own merits. Chu Zhao agreed. No, at any time, no matter what era or time, there are still a majority of people who are cheating in this place, the man said and pointed to his head, so I am very happy that the country does not have one vote for each person, otherwise how could I possibly beat those idiots? Chu Zhao took a deep breath, and for a moment he didn't know how to answer this. After a while, Chu Zhao seemed to be brewing an emotion, and then said seriously, I've watched the movie and had some fun. Now that you're done playing, it's time to go wherever you need to go, right? Well, you can go wherever you need to go. The man stood up and walked towards the screen in front of him. Chu Zhao stood up, and he suddenly felt a little unreal, because the other party agreed too easily, and this realistic task was just completed. Chu Zhao, who seemed to have noticed something was wrong, took out his mobile phone. The date on the touch screen looked a bit strange. If he looked carefully, he saw that the fonts and numbers were actually reversed. Damn! Damn it! Chu Zhao raised his head and looked at the screen in front of him. He saw the man looking at him on the screen with a smile. You are looking for death. Chu Zhao touched his pocket, only to find that the magic weapon he had prepared was missing, and his clothes were torn when he pulled them casually, as if they were made of paper. Are you looking for this? The man's voice on the screen was played through the speakers in the theater. On the screen, the man was holding a police uniform in his hand, as if he was deliberately demonstrating with Chu Zhao, with a very obvious disdain. A person like you wouldn't survive even a quarter of an hour in the ghost movie I made. Snapped. Suddenly, the lights in the theater were turned off, as if someone turned off the switch, and the screen dimmed in an instant. Chu Zai felt like the world was spinning, as if he was sitting in a racing car turning at high speed. When the strong dizziness disappeared, Chu Zai found that he was still sitting in the original position, and the clothes on his body were back. At the same time, there was a theater staff member who passed out on the ground beside him. The originally black screen slowly rose up with a dark red light, as red as blood, and at the same time, a figure belonging to a man slowly appeared. However, the current atmosphere is no longer as quiet and peaceful as before, but instead seems very weird and creepy. I told you to be careful. Sunur's figure appeared from the side door, holding a dagger in her hand. Just now, she should have cut off the power supply before removing Chu Zhao from the screen. Rescued from it? Chu Zhao's face was a little embarrassed. He knew that Sunur, like him, also took on a real task. Now it can only mean that Sunur completed her own task and rushed to help him non-stop. I was careless, Chu Zhao replied. Sunur held the dagger in front of him and actively walked towards the screen, while signaling Chu Zhao to stand on the other side of him to provide support. I just want to make another movie, a truly perfect movie, the black shadow on the screen said. He seemed a little painful and a little annoyed. Perhaps, it was because he noticed that the woman who had just appeared seemed to herself very difficult to deal with. But you shouldn't kill people. Even if you possess a movie director, it's okay. But if you want to use the life of a living person to be the main supporting role in your movie, that won't work. The dagger pierced his own shadow position, and at the same time, a ray of fighting spirit bloomed from his body and was infused into the fighting spirit. Hiss, hiss, hiss. A violent friction sound came from the shadow, and Sunur's shadow suddenly lengthened and became very tall. Aren't you also the main and supporting characters in other people's movies? Shadow's voice sounded angry and roaring. You could have been a normal ghost, but you are too smart. Do you know that your ending today was caused by what you just said? A trace of ridicule appeared on the corner of Sunur's mouth. Otherwise, even if you kill innocent people indiscriminately, we probably won't care about you. Stars, gather. Chu Zhao took out an arrow cluster from his pocket and pierced the tip into his palm. The blood-stained arrow turned into a stream of light and flew away. Puff. The arrow pierced the black shadow, and at the same time, the special attribute power attached to the arrow was also destroying the black shadow. The black shadow opened its teeth and claws in pain, but the position where Sunur stood was between its two clones, completely preventing it from ending. They echoed each other, which made him very uncomfortable and aggrieved. Of course, it was also the price he paid for the failed sneak attack on Suner just now. The stalemate and mutual consumption lasted for about 10 minutes. In the end, the black shadow, which had been pierced 3 times by Chu Zhao's arrows, finally couldn't hold on anymore. The shadow split, and there was a sound of a balloon exploding in the theater. Immediately afterwards, there was a stench that hit the nostrils. There were no less than 30 people sitting on the seats in the movie theater. These people were old and young, male and female, but they were all dead, and the most decomposed bodies were covered with flesh maggots. Chu Zhao put away the arrow, looked at the scene in front of him, and shook his head. In the real world, the cases handled by the police can often only be regarded as the tip of the iceberg. Leaving aside the underreporting, these are cases of abnormal disappearances and deaths. It is also difficult to be discovered by the police. I don't know whether it is the influence of the radio or the fact that these ghosts can consciously avoid leaking the news. Regardless of the stench of corpses surrounding her, Suner sat down on an empty seat, and immediately a stream of blood spilled from the corner of her mouth. She was already injured, but she rushed over to help Chu Zhao, and now her injury was even more serious. Chu Zhao walked to Suner and handed over a wet wipe. Suner took the wet wipe and wiped the corners of his mouth. I couldn't compare to Subai before, and now I can't compare to you. Now I can see myself clearly, and I don't have to feel sorry for myself. If I die tomorrow, I'll be buried in the place I chose before. At the cemetery, Chu Zhao was very free and easy. Recently, something is wrong. Too many people have received real-life tasks, Suner said with some worry. Why does the broadcast feel like a spring cleaning? Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyaolong. Chapter 925. Grandma Yes, Bobo Chicken has a slightly cramped roof, small square tables, and diners all sit on small benches. Perhaps, compared to sitting in a bright hall, eating Bobo Chicken in this way can bring back the feeling that most people have when they were young. The fat man was eating there by himself, and Chen Guang and Xie Zhen were also eating slowly one by one. Subai was the only one sitting there, with a gloomy look on his face. It was not because Subai couldn't get used to this, but because he was currently thinking there were a lot of messy noises, although they were not enough to affect the clarity of his tomb, but it was not so comfortable to be constantly being disturbed by chirping. Since the ancient zombie's second-level cultivation was successful, including the previous tentative fight with Chen Ryu, this was the second time he used it. The side effects of absorbing the vitality of the nearby environment made Subai very uncomfortable every time. The remaining poison has not disappeared this time, and this time a new sorrow has been added, making Subai no longer even have the appetite to eat. Boss Liang seems to be going to other places. He looks very busy, which is correct. If nothing else happens, he is the only big boss left in the world. Unless there is such a weirdo like him in the Western audience circle, but the probability is really low. Before leaving, Boss Liang gave Fusu a lengthy teaching and explanation from the position of a Wang puppet government official. Fusu maintained his firm party spirit and remained unmoved, but in the end Boss Liang did not follow through. The final shooting was to first cut off the connection between Fusu and Sanjiang, then completely break Fusu's broken body, even severely damaging his soul, and then seal it in a ring. And this ring is now worn on Xie Zhen's finger. After all, Xie Zhen is very close to the next story world. Since the last broadcast crash, Subai and Fatty are the first batch to have the honor to experience the new world. A group of people from the story world, the monks and the Buddha, are probably already in the story world now, so it will be the next group's turn to show off. Therefore, rather than saying that Boss Liang's previous tirade was to persuade Fusu to surrender, it would be better to explain it to himself and strengthen his determination to be a traitor. It's just that the country is easy to change and the nature is hard to change. In the end, Boss Liang still didn't dare to kill Fusu right here. His meaning is very simple. Let Xie Zhen, who enters the story world next time, take Fusu to the story world and leave this problem to the broadcaster to solve. To be honest, the 4 people here who were eating bobo chicken, including Xiezhen, didn't understand what Boss Liang was afraid of. From the appearance and fate of Fusu, it can be seen that the first emperor is finally that generation. Could it be that Boss Liang is still worried that the broadcast may be overturned and that he may be settled by his wife, so he dares not take action to leave the opportunity to surrender anyway? It's been a long time since I've had this authentic taste. It's so enjoyable. Boss, please give me another egg fried rice and jelly, the fat man shouted. Yes, the boss responded. Hey, Dabai, do you still have a big problem now? The fat man asked with some concern. Subai shook his head, no big problem. Well, I'll help you clean it up after I recover from my injuries. It's really inconvenient for several of us to be injured now. After saying that, the fat man glanced at the ring in Xiezhen's hand and said thoughtfully, also, do you remember that piece of jade ruyi? The remnant soul of the original princess of Qin was sealed there. Haha, I thought before that the princess of Qin had to retreat to that piece of ruyi after the defeat. Now it seems not so simple. Could it be that our predecessors in the audience discovered the princess's remnant soul hundreds of years ago or even thousands of years ago, but made a choice similar to Boss Liang's today, choosing to seal it rather than kill it? Haha, it seems that listeners throughout the ages have always been upright in body and speech, and they are determined to be traitors while still thinking about protecting the orphans of martyrs, Xiesun said after taking a sip of tea. I just took a look at the audience forum. The recent real-life tasks are shockingly complex, 4 or 5 times more than before, Chen Guang said. Broadcasting is still a bit conscientious. Remember to clean the house before moving. The fat man ate another bunch of chicken feet, and then patted his belly with satisfaction. Dabai, I've finished the rituals over there, let's go back. Okay. Manager Xie, are you coming with us or going back to Shanghai by yourself? Don't bother me anymore. I'm going back to Shanghai. There are still some things to deal with there, Xiezhen said. Everyone parted ways here. Chen Guang and Xiezhen returned to Chengdu together. Xiezhen was going to fly back to Shanghai from Chengdu. Subai sat in Fatty's car, but Fatty turned a corner again after driving out of Lishan. In the afternoon we drove back to Lishan. Subai was not surprised by this. Although the eldest son Fusu was taken away, the 3 rivers and the 3 bronze iron chains were still there. It was not surprising that the fat man was so happy to see the hunt and his almost pathological collecting habit. Maybe let these go. Maybe those things are not very attractive to Xiezhen and Chen Guang, but for those who have come into contact with the bronze utensils with that kind of pattern, those things will never be let go. The car drove to the scenic spot again. The scenic spot has been closed today. There was a tornado here yesterday. Now the scenic spot is preparing to be repaired. At the same time, the province and the country will immediately send an expert team to repair and maintain the damaged areas of the Buddha. Dabai, do you still remember the laboratory I told you about? The fat man stretched out a hand outside the window and shook out the ashes. Maybe you were born in that laboratory. It's impossible. I was conceived by a surrogate, and my memory is very clear that the woman who carried me as a surrogate gave birth to me in the hospital. As soon as I was born, Su Yuhang took me and put me under the faucet in the hospital bathroom. It's probably because they had to set me up in an environment where I was born and raised as a normal person, otherwise they wouldn't have had to deliberately instill those memories into me. This is the difference between intentional and unintentional. Fatty smiled and said, just like when you saved the firefighter's son, you had no purpose in saving him. You and he don't know each other, so he probably didn't become an audience member in the end, but if it was the old firefighter who saved his son, then if that guy didn't die that time, it's almost certain that he would become an audience member soon. If your birth is too deliberate, then according to the broadcasting rules, you will not be accepted as a listener in the future. After all, Broadcast awareness and broadcast rules are two completely different concepts. The two stayed in the car for a while. Fatty confirmed through some of his connections that Zhen Zhen had boarded the plane to Shanghai and that Chen Guang had appeared in the Chengdu area. Then he got out of the car and started to set up a small formation. Actually, you don't need to be so cautious. I believe both Xie Zhen and Chen Guang have probably guessed that you and I will come back. The fat man continued to work there, while Subai leaned against the car window and smoked a cigarette. It's better to be careful. They are worried about your strength, and they know in their hearts that even if there is something down there that can be discovered, they can't take it away as long as you are here. Grandma, it's really easy to talk if you have the strength. It's a pity, Fatty, I finally climbed to this level, and before I even had time to show off on the radio, I started to prepare to destroy the soil for my pretentiousness. This is fate. In the past, those people were probably more or less afraid of attaining enlightenment, because after attaining enlightenment, they would probably receive train tickets and go to that place to be used as cannon fodder. Now we are being forced to attain enlightenment as soon as possible. Otherwise they would have to be dealt with without even a chance to be cannon fodder. The blame is that we are at this moment. If the world can survive another 7 or 8 years, then we may be able to slowly follow the normal process. We have reached that point, but it seems that there is no resistance in that world. That's not right, Dabai. The fat man scratched his head and asked, there is actually a problem in my mind that I can't figure out. Explain. About how long did it take for radio to conquer our world? If we go by historical records, Alexander was about 100 years earlier than the first emperor. In other words, when radio invaded our world, it first started from the west, and then about 100 years later in 2000, radio began to invade the east. Then the first emperor unified China in 221 BC. In 207 BC, Xing surrendered to Liu Bang and Qin was destroyed. In other words, the Qin dynasty lasted for 20 years and was over? Isn't he known as is there an army of 100,000 high-level listeners, so invincible? Alexander abandoned his army midway to teach radio awareness how to play games. The first emperor probably didn't play like this, and it stands to reason that he should have lasted longer than the West. Moreover, it took almost 2,000 years for the broadcasts in that world to transport big-shot listeners batch by batch for consumption. Does this mean that our world is much lower than that world? That's not right, it doesn't make sense. I had some questions about this before Subai replied, but I don't think broadcasting has tampered with history. At least given the age of history, it shouldn't be able to tamper with it. Okay, let's go down and take a look at the bronze iron chain first. It's a blessing from the heavenly official. There are no taboos. Open it. A line appeared at the formation position under the fat man's feet. The fat man took the initiative to walk over, and Subai also crossed the line. A thin line separates the scene, but it is a different picture. At this time, the river surface in front of Subai is no longer made of water, but is made of a huge white mist. This state is a bit like looking at the sky. This formation is also inherited. It was during the time when Dao controlled floods. It is said that Dao used this formation to explore water channels and divert water when he controlled floods. This is a water vein, light and invisible. If it is a dragon vein, you can see it more clearly, and it is golden. The fat man explained from the side, look, there is an iron chain over there. At this moment, a huge bronze iron chain floated in the white mist, looming like a dormant beast, ready to burst out and eat people at any time. Subai frowned, pointed under the iron chain, and said, there seems to be a shadow under the iron chain. What is under it? It can't be seen clearly, but it seems to be moving neatly. It looks a bit like Yin soldiers taking advantage of it, Fatty guessed. No, there's a problem. Subai seemed to suddenly remember something, and the image of Liang Sen lightly stepping on the water when he went to catch Fusu appeared in his mind. At that time, I thought Liang Sen was suppressing those 3 chains, but things are not that simple, and Liang Sen seemed to have planned to kill Fusu at first. He watched the scene there for so long just to confirm that Fusu's appearance would not have much impact, so he came out to prepare. He took action, but in the end he just held Fusu up and said a bunch of specious nonsense. In the end, he just sealed Fusu. Isn't he cowardly? Fatty asked. Yes, he was scared, but what made him suddenly scared was not the vague unknown and possible revenge. Boss Liang might have actually seen something incredible at that time. What? Didn't you notice that Fusu seemed too calm when he was caught by Boss Liang? If a person who had been sealed for more than 2,000 years had given up so easily, his self-awareness would have long since dissipated in the seal. So, Fusu might not have given up at that time, but was really disdainful. He concluded that Boss Liang did not dare to really kill him at that time, and he still had someone to rely on. At this time, on the plane, Xie Zhen changed into a pair of slippers with the attentive help of the stewardess, picked up a newspaper and read it. After the plane took off, he put down the newspaper and looked out the window, overlooking the scenery below. The earth murmured to himself. This is supposed to be the empire that my father established for me. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 926. Fatty had only set up a simple formation before, and could only look at it from a long distance away. He really couldn't see clearly what was under the chain. Therefore, after the two of them exited the formation, Fatty planned to do more. Taking some time to rearrange a formation, he even planned to use his newly arranged formation to open a gap with the water system in front of him. After all, no matter how he looked at it from a distance with a telescope, it would be clearer to see it directly in person. It's just that the arrangement of this formation took a bit long. After all, Fatty had to conduct a comprehensive analysis of the location of the 3 rivers and the bronze chain in front of him, which would take about 2 days. Subai didn't sit next to the fat man and waited slowly. He needed to find a quiet place to resolve the vague noise that still existed in his mind. By coincidence, Mount Imei was nearby, not far away. Fatty has no complaints or imbalances about this. Today's Fatty is simply obsessed with formation research and Taoist research, just like those poor students in school. If they don't do well with a gun pointed at their heads, if you were to shoot someone when you were learning, I would guess that, except for a few people who really have deficient IQs, the vast majority of people would not be much worse off. After saying goodbye to the fat man, Subai went to Lishan high-speed railway station and bought a ticket for the nearby station. 10 minutes later, the high-speed train arrived at Imeishan station from Lishan station. Nowadays, this coordinated and packaged travel method is indeed very convenient, such as for tourists after seeing the terracotta warriors and horses in Xi'an, we can take the high-speed train to Huayan for half an hour to climb Mount Huashan. The advancement of science and technology has indeed changed people's lives, but Subai feels that all this has nothing to do with him. After all, there is really not much time left for him to stay in this world. In the end, he may leave here or die. Moreover, no matter how convenient the technology is, it seems difficult to compare with the era 2000 years ago when humans could step on the clouds and fight against dragons. If compared in terms of pure magnitude, that era was the real era of martial arts. And the current world is a bit like a deformed child deliberately castrated by radio. Now think about it, Subai used to think that Newton turned to study theology in the twilight years of his life. Is it possible that that genius and scientific giant felt something? Perhaps, in 200 years or even 1,000 years later, years from now, when human science and technology has advanced enough to truly explore the universe, they may discover that the universe beyond the Earth is actually a barrier at infinity, or a scam. It's a bit similar to the movie The Truman Show, except that The Truman Show only imprisoned Truman alone, but here, they imprisoned creatures who deceived an ethnic group or even a plane. Subai does not consider himself a thinker, because the pace of his life prevents him from being sentimental. In fact, if the audience can retire, each of them can become a great thinker. If the literary quality is better, go to it is more than enough to be a writer. As long as you write about your audience experience, it will definitely be a masterpiece, no less than Harry Potter. After getting off the train station, I was pulled into his van by an old man with a messy beard. The old man was very excited because the young man didn't even negotiate the price, which meant that he could shout higher when he got there later. This situation exists in any scenic spot. After all, many locals living near the scenic spot relied on the mountains and water in ancient times, but now they rely on tourists. In fact, Subai should be able to negotiate prices on weekdays. He has always I am used to pretending to be ordinary people in real life, but the problem is that Subai is feeling a little uncomfortable now, so all the steps can be simplified. Therefore, when the old man drove the car to the place, he looked back and found that the big fat sheep on the back seat was missing. The old man was immediately frightened and broke into a cold sweat. You must know that his car was locked after it started. Subai didn't care how much he frightened the old man. He climbed up the stairs and walked for about 2 miles to the ropeway entrance. However, there was a long queue at the ropeway entrance. All the money for the bus was gone, and Subai didn't care about jumping in line. This is actually like playing a game with cheats. It is easy to lose the sense of game experience and make your life in the real world boring. Therefore, the higher the ability of most listeners, the more low-key they are in the real world. After taking the cable car to the top, Subai did not go to the Golden Summit. Instead, he walked down the cliff under the steps alone. Although Mount Imei has been commercially developed and suitable for tourists, most of the locations of this large mountain are actually still it was deserted, so Subai chose a hollow and sunken spot and sat down. Below is the white mist caused by the recent rainy weather, and in front is the straight cliff. From the perspective of the scenery, it is indeed very good. At that moment, Subai closed his eyes, like a hermit, and began to clear up the noise in his mind. This sitting lasted almost a day and a night. When Subai opened his eyes again, there was a look of doubt in his eyes. Although the noise in his mind had been cleared a little by himself, it was not completely eliminated. And Subai was convinced that even if Fatty Monk, Buddha, and others came to help him again, it would be difficult to get rid of them completely. These things had begun to become something like a stubborn disease. He reached out and shook the dewdrops off his body. In fact, there was no need to clean it up, because Subai's whole body was already soaked by the mist. He breathed a long sigh of relief. After all, it was Su Fugui's self-created technique. Su Fugui was said to have died after leaving the place of enlightenment. Although the cause of his death was unknown, Subai instinctively felt that he should be with there is a connection between these techniques. It is really hard to be sure whether if I practice Su Fugui's technique now, I will end up with exactly the same ending as him. This is actually like drinking poison to quench thirst. The difference in choice is that if you don't drink, you will die of thirst immediately. If you drink, even if you are poisoned to death, it will be a matter of time. Both the fat man and the monk expressed great doubts about this technique, but they didn't persuade themselves to give up, because they also knew that no one had any room to retreat now. Standing up, Subai realized that the place he had chosen to meditate was not natural, but more man-made. However, this was not a cave. When Subai entered with his spiritual sense, he did not find any secret door. There are some vague marks on the walls that prove someone has been here. Subai looked at these handwritings carefully. They should be paintings or graffiti with a brush, but they were already modeled and indistinguishable. He was not interested in doing archaeology here, so he simply chose to leave. When going down the mountain, Subai did not choose to take the cable car, but slid directly down the rock wall. No matter how steep the cliff was, he could not fall to his death now. But looking at the scene of the cable car going back and forth in the distance, Subai felt as if he had been there before. It's more exciting to sit on a cable car and look at the surrounding scenery before you become a listener. At the tourist resting place at the foot of the mountain, Subai found a noodle shop and ordered a bowl of noodles. While waiting for the noodles, Subai took out his cell phone and charged it up. After turning it on, he confirmed that Fatty had not sent him a message. It's probably because the formation hasn't been set up yet. Opposite Subai sat a girl who was about 22 or 3 years old. The girl was smoking a cigarette. Her clothes were well dressed and not that luxurious. But after all, Subai had also been a young man. Therefore, it can be seen that ordinary wealthy people cannot afford the clothes or shoes on girls. The girl noticed Subai's gaze. To be precise, she seemed to have been paying attention to Subai for a long time. When Subai looked at her, she stood up and sat down in front of Subai's table. "Brother, are you traveling alone?" Subai nodded and did not take the other person's words seriously. "I'm alone too. How about I take a companion with me and pay for my trip?" the girl suggested. If it were any other man, he probably wouldn't be able to help but feel a little overwhelmed at this time. After all, most people's concept of travel often involves some vague longing for love and sex. If Subai hadn't seen the price of the girl's clothes, he might have classified her with the impoverished female students he met in Josegu. "You are not short of money." Subai looked at the girl and said, "Is it because you lack passion? But you are not looking for passion in this mountainous area. Are you so timid?" The girl seemed to want to deliberately provoke Subai. "That's right. I've always been very cautious in doing things, and I don't dare to break the rules," Subai said seriously. "Then you are quite boring." "Are you sick?" Subai asked. This was originally a curse word, but there was a look of panic on the girl's face, not anger, but panic. Although the girl quickly regained her composure, Subai still understood. "You are not sick," Subai said with certainty. "What? I am an old Chinese medicine practitioner, and you are indeed not sick. Zombies can see the death energy in people. When most people are dying or suffering from some serious illness, some death energy will be condensed in their limbs and meridians, but this woman does not, which means she is very healthy." The girl was a little confused and seemed a little at a loss. "You are really not sick, so there is no need to retaliate against the world in this way. You can find another hospital for a review." The examination reports in the hospital sometimes make mistakes. When Subai said these words, he revealed he added a little breath of life, which wouldn't put much pressure on the girl, but was enough to make his words more convincing in the girl's ears. The girl suddenly started crying, which made everyone else in the noodle shop look at her curiously. "Go to the hospital for another checkup." Subai's noodles were brought over by the waiter at this time. But what?" Subai asked after taking a bite of noodles. "If I wasn't sick, then I would have found dozens of men this month, and it wouldn't have been in vain." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 927. When Subai finished eating the noodles and left, the girl was still sitting there alone in a daze. Subai didn't continue to talk nonsense. The closer he got to the radio, the more affected he was by the radio. For example, the radio was very reasonable. At least from this point of view, the girl is entirely to blame for herself. For most people, human nature is indeed evil. When you are unlucky, you will look at the normal people around you very unfavorably, and then hope to drag more people are as unlucky as you, so you will feel more comfortable. Many people who grew up in rural areas have heard a story told by adults when they were young, that is, don't go near pools and rivers, because there are drowning ghosts there. They are not willing to be the only ones who drown, and want someone to help them. This is just a story made up by adults to warn their children not to play by the river to prevent accidents, but some other things can also be seen from the side. Mount Ime has been raining recently and the weather is not good. Subai did not rush to get a taxi to go to the high-speed rail station. Instead, he chose to squat on the roadside with a cigarette in his mouth without lighting it. Inside. In the past, when I was in the place of enlightenment, I felt that I had a lot of time, because there were not many things to distract my attention. But once I came out, I had to worry about little things, lychee things, and radio things. Su Yuhang's affairs, including the recent affairs of Boss Liang and the Daqin master, came one after another. It's like missing the warmth of summer in winter, and missing the coldness of winter in summer. People are so mean sometimes. After just squatting and enjoying the day's time for 2 hours, Subai took out his mobile phone. Calculating now, it has been almost 2 days, and there is no news from Fatty. Is he too busy? Subai was about to make a call, but at this moment he saw the monk's call coming. Hey, monk, have you left the story world? Amitba, the poor monk, almost didn't come out, and the same goes for Gyatso. The story world this time is indeed different from before, and there are also many dead listeners. The broadcast looks more wasteful than before. It's good to come out and take a breather. By the way, have you advanced? Soon, just in the next few days, the monk replied, I plan to go back to Xi'an soon to prepare. But monk, wasn't your previous temple erased by the broadcast after the bloody corpse appeared? Subai remembered that this seemed to be the case. As long as you have it in your heart. Haha, Subai smiled. Indeed, he couldn't play tricks with monks. Is the fat man with you? The poor monk just called him and it showed that he was not in the service area, the monk asked. Hearing this, Subai frowned. The fat man said he wanted to set up a formation. He and I are going to a place using the formation. He should be in Lishan. I have been in Emishan for the past 2 days. Can't I get through his phone? Subai had a premonition that something happened to Fatty's side. Damn. This stupid fat guy doesn't know how to put in the magic circle before he can't hold himself back, right? According to Fatty's character, this kind of thing is really possible. Are you in Lishan? The poor monk and Gyatso will come right away. The monk paused and then said, Dabai, that woman is still here. It seems that she has been staying in the tent since that time when I had a discussion with you. It's okay. I feel more at ease with her looking after the orphanage. Subai didn't care much about this. From Chen Ryu's position, there was really no need to do anything harmful to the little guy. As for Chen Ryu's inner thoughts, Subai could guess what she was thinking in her heart. She might be hesitating. After all, she had directly broken through a rank with the second turn of Gujan, but she was also on the road of no return. It's not that Chen Ryu has to learn the ancient zombie 3-turn technique. In fact, she didn't ask for this technique from herself, but Chen Ryu should have a lot of self-created techniques like this. After all, although she is not a Taoist big boss, but before the last batch of big bosses left, she could hang out in that circle, so there should be a lot of good things. There should still be 2 years before the broadcast completely destroys the audience. For herself and others, time is very tight, but for Chen Ryu, she is just short of the last step. Should she find other ways to get over it or drink poison to quench her thirst like herself? Indeed, need to think about it carefully. Okay, I'll go to Lishan first. The location of the formation is at the Lishan Giant Buddha Ferry. You should be able to find it. Okay, poor monk, come here right now. The monk didn't ask what it was about, but something that attracted both Subai and Fatty must have the same attraction for him. Besides, it's not a chat now. When? This time, Subai did not choose to take the high-speed train, but started running at his own speed. A while ago, Chen Guang also used his own strength to rush from Chengdu after receiving a real mission. With Subai's current level of strength, he ran at full speed. The speed is really no worse than the speed of the high-speed rail. When Subai returned to Lashan and saw the giant Buddha again, he felt an inexplicable feeling in his heart. When Subai came to the ferry area and stopped to take a breath, he looked around and found that the whole city there was a special atmosphere, not a toxin leak, nor a crisis, because people's lives were still going on as usual, but Subai smelled a chilling atmosphere. He felt as if he was at an ancient battlefield site, but the surroundings, the normal operation of the city, kept denying his feelings. Subai found the place where Fatty arranged the formation. There was a low-level ghost building a wall at the entrance to prevent ordinary people nearby from accidentally walking in. However, it was not difficult for Subai. Subai walked in directly. This time is different from the last time. This time, after walking in, the view in front of me suddenly becomes clearer, and I can continue to walk forward. At this time, the surrounding white fog also begins to slowly retreat and dissipate, as if it senses the presence of living people. Fear arises from the breath. These white mists are water veins. Although they are as timid as little white rabbits now, once the flood season comes, these water veins will become more ferocious than beasts. Fatty said before that the floods, when Deo controlled the flood, seemed to be some water veins have become spirits, and many of the mythical Hebo river gods are the illusion of water veins becoming spirits. There is another thing in common, that is, they are based on those who drowned in the river recently. He chooses the most handsome, good-looking, or most temperamental one as his possession. Therefore, there are many stories in myths and legends about someone who drowned and became the river god of that river. This is just like the Cinderella story, it may not be so beautiful. The bronze chain is right in front. This time I can really get closer and take a closer look. However, the shadow under the bronze chain when I looked at it last time is now invisible, as if it has completely disappeared. This water vein has become exceptionally clean. But where did the fat man go? The phone couldn't be connected and people were missing. If there was nothing wrong here, why did the fat man disappear for fun? Ding ding ding, ding ding ding. There seemed to be a clear ringing sound in the distance, like a child shaking a toy in his hand. For a while, the white mist in the water veins became more intense. This scene gave Subai a feeling of déjà vu. He remembered that he had felt this way when he was in the underworld at the place of enlightenment. Then, Subai turned around suddenly and saw a figure appearing behind him. A floating lantern, the light of the lantern is faint and has the power to capture the heart and soul. This lantern. Subai looked back carefully, but did not see the faceless man. However, the feeling of this lantern was absolutely the same as the lantern held by the faceless man beside the Huanquan, the place of enlightenment. Subai can be sure of this. His perception is countless times stronger than ordinary people, and he can be sure that he will not feel wrong. Ding ding ding, ding ding ding. The crisp sound suddenly approached, as if it was ringing in his ears. Subai was stunned for a moment. For a moment, he felt that his consciousness began to be stretched and pulled away. He closed his eyes and Subai forcibly stabilized his mind. When he opened his eyes again, a shadow actually appeared in front of him. The shadow was approaching him. He couldn't see it very clearly because he was separated by a white mist, but a very neat friction sound began to come from the shadow. This feeling was like the sound of metal pieces colliding. Click, click, click. The friction sound became clearer and clearer, and the shadow got closer and closer. Subai took a few steps back to one side so that he could not face the direction of the shadow. When the shadow got closer, Subai finally saw clearly what was inside the shadow. What is it? This is a group of soldiers holding weapons moving forward. 5 of them are in a row, walking forward at the same pace, but these people are not living people, because the face exposed by their helmets is a piece of iron. Cyan. Subai and the monk had met a Yin soldier once before in Shanghai, but this time it was definitely not as simple as a Yin soldier borrowing a passage, because the aura exuded by these soldiers made Subai feel a little afraid, and Subai, I have a vague feeling that the armor worn by these Yin soldiers is somewhat similar to those of the terracotta warriors and horses in the pit, but I can't be sure yet. This group of Yin soldiers was not many in number, with 5 in a row and less than 10 rows in total. However, when this group of Yin soldiers had just passed halfway in front of Subai, Subai saw a bloated figure in the group. The guy had a talisman on his forehead and was following the Yin soldiers around him. I don't know what happened. Suddenly a gust of wind blew. Maybe the talisman on the fat man's forehead had expired, but it blew off. Immediately, all the Yin soldiers suddenly stopped. It was as if they suddenly realized that there was a traitor among their own. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 928. Dear passengers, the plane has arrived at Qinhuangdao Baidahe Airport. Please disembark from the front door in order. On behalf of all the crew members of Shanghai Airlines on this flight, I would like to thank you for your choice. We look forward to meeting you next time. Compared with airports in big cities, Baidahe Airport is a little more sophisticated. Xie Zhen walked down the ramp and boarded the shuttle bus. He did not salute, so he walked out of the terminal without waiting for the luggage after getting off the shuttle bus. The cell phone rang at this time, and Xie Zhen answered the call. Hello. Shaoqi taxi service is at your service. I'm at the parking lot. You can see me when you exit the terminal and go straight ahead. My license plate number is. I see you. With that said, Xie Zhen hung up the phone. Qin Yang looked at the screen of his mobile phone. It seemed that the passenger had really good eyesight, so he could save himself the trouble of searching for it. After a while, Xie Zhen opened the car door and got in the car. When Xie Zhen got into the car, Qin Yang, who was about to hand over a bottle of mineral water, was suddenly stunned. Sir, have we met before? Haha, this is my second time coming to Qinhuangdao. The last time I came was many years ago, Xie Zhen replied. Upon hearing this answer, Qin Yang gently rubbed the steering wheel with his fingers. He instinctively felt that he, the passenger, had really seen him somewhere before, but he couldn't remember it. We're going to the Shangri-La Hotel, right? We'll be there soon. No, let's go to Changgli County, Xie Zhen said, taking out a stack of RMB from his wallet and delivering it. Is that okay, master? The strange feeling in Qin Yang's heart rose again. No, there must be something wrong, but Qin Yang still reached out and took the money. Okay, it's okay to go, but it's far away, there are dozens of kilometers away. It's okay, Xie Zhen smiled, I just happened to take a nap. With that said, Xie Zhen leaned against the car window and closed his eyes. Qin Yang started the car and drove out of the airport. He was not worried about gangsters or robberies, but he also knew that his uneasiness now was definitely not because of worrying about this, but because he was sitting in the back seat. That passenger put a lot of pressure on him, even though he couldn't sense any energy fluctuations from the other person. Fortunately, Qin Yang has seen the wind and rain after all. Although he has not yet advanced to the advanced level of audience, at least his strength is at the peak of the senior level. He does not know much about the recent ups and downs and things that have happened. After all, he was no longer on the same level as Subai and his gang, and he didn't know the reason for the broadcast crash. However, the sudden suspension of the previous broadcast and the sudden appearance of such a large number of real-life mission announcements after the recent resumption of the broadcast still made Qin Yang smell a special atmosphere, as if something was different. Changgli County is not very close or far from the urban area of Qinhuangdao. Normally Qin Yang would not have accepted this order, especially if it was a sudden change of destination after getting on the bus. He needed to make money. But he is very indifferent to money. After all, the only ones who need money are his wife and children. Money really doesn't mean much to him. Therefore, the stack of money just handed over is not the reason why Qin Yang changed his mind. Finally, at dusk, Qin Yang drove the car to Changgli. Before Qin Yang could ask where the guest was, Xie Zhen, who had closed his eyes before and seemed to be asleep, suddenly said, "Jiaxi Mountain." Qin Yang didn't express any objection. He just regarded it as sending the Buddha to the west. He nodded immediately, turned the car and drove towards Jiaxi Mountain. Anyway, Jiaxi Mountain is only a few kilometers outside Changgli County. At first glance, Jiaxi Mountain seems to be a very common name for the mountain top, but in fact many people have actually heard of Cao's song Viewing the Sea. Jiaxi Mountain is facing the east to view the sea. In fact, historians once couldn't tell which of the fallen Jiaxi Mountains was the mountain where Cao climbed to compose his poems. Jiaxi Mountains also existed in Shandong and Liaoning until the 1980s near the Meng Jiangnu Temple in Qinhuangdao. A tomb of Meng Jiangnu was excavated, and through the records of unearthed cultural relics, it was determined that Jiaxi Mountain in Changgli County was the one that Cao meant climbed to. For this reason, a great man who liked to recuperate in Baidahe once wrote Long Taosha Baidahe contains there is a posthumous chapter on Jiaxi in the east, which can be regarded as a final conclusion to this controversy. The scenic spots should be closed now, Qin Yang said. Scenic area, Xie Zhen reached out and touched the car window. Because the temperature difference between day and night in Qinhuangdao was large, some water mist had formed in the closed car window. For people like you, there are still doors that are closed but not closed. Do you want to explain? Click. Qin Yang stepped on the brakes and the car shuddered. He immediately looked through the rearview mirror at Xie Zhen behind him. Who are you? Come with me up the mountain. Xie Zhen didn't open the door, but his figure had already appeared outside the car, with his back to the car and facing Jiaxi Mountain. The Jiaxi Mountain in his eyes had a completely different meaning from that in other people's eyes, including Qin Yang's. The smoke dissipated in a flash, but it really seemed like a dream. Qin Yang also got out of the car and followed Xie Zhen with some vigilance. The two of them started climbing one behind the other. They did not take the artificially dug mountain road, but walked directly on the rocky cliffs. Along the way, Qin Yang didn't ask any questions, and the two of them seemed a little too quiet. After all, it was indeed a bit strange to see two grown men walking one behind the other in the uninhabited mountains in the evening. Finally, Xie Zhen stopped and said, "Your courage is quite good. Compared to someone I know, it's not worth mentioning." The person Qin Yang was talking about is still in Lishan, but Qin Yang didn't know that Subai had just met the person in front of him a day ago. Not only we have seen each other before, and the two of them even fought, almost overturning the Lishan giant Buddha and Sanjiang. So, I admire the way it chooses people. They are selfish, self-interested, and self-centered, but they also have a will that many people cannot have, such as the desire to survive, and even other characters derived from it. There was a look of confusion on Qin Yang's face. He didn't know what the other party meant by these words. He. Seemingly sensing Qin Yang's confusion at this time, Xie Zhen laughed. This person is only qualified to be his own coachman and walker, not a tutor who can chat with him. We're just ahead, Xie Zhen said. In front, Qin Yang paused and said, "Are you here to see the inscriptions?" Those, Xie Zhen seemed to be a little concerned about these two words. Well, there are many inscriptions left by the ancients on it. The most famous one is the Jiashimen Ci left by the first emperor. After all, the name Qinhuangdao comes from the first emperor, Qin Yang said. Ji Zhen didn't answer and started to move forward. Qin Yang also followed behind. For some reason, the closer he got to the place where the inscription was, the pressure on him began to become more and more intense. It seemed that the man in front of him was constantly tearing off his disguise to reveal his true identity. His appearance, or his original temperament. From the beginning to the end, the other party did not show any aura related to strength, but it was this slowly gathering temperament that made it difficult for him to raise his head. Qinhuangdao, when did such a being come to Qinhuangdao? Is he an audience? Qin Yang closed his eyes, and he began to recall Xie Zhen's appearance in his mind, but found that he could not restore his appearance at all, even if he had just seen and spoken to him. This was really an unbelievably advanced form. It's a cover-up. What are you thinking about? Xie Zhen asked. I still feel like I've seen you somewhere. What you saw was not me, Xie Zhen replied. Finally, the inscription appeared, a very delicate large stele with Jiashi Mensi engraved on it. It looked like an addition added by later generations, but the inscription was still the same, but it was not erected by the first emperor more than 2,000 years ago. That monument. Are you interested in this? Qin Yang and Xie Zhen stood side by side in front of the inscription. Ji Zhen stretched out his hand, rubbed the inscription, and then shook his head silently. Immediately, he raised his palm, and in the palm of his hand, a faint ray of blood appeared. Immediately, a ray of rays of light suddenly rose diagonally in front. This ray of rays of light seemed to be induced by the blood light. A huge banner could be seen in the rays of light. On the banner, the words were sonorous and carried a kind of aura that swallowed mountains and rivers. Of majesty. Is this the real Jiashimen Ci? Qin Yang showed a look of surprise on his face. He was from Qinhuangdao, so he naturally knew more about these things. In other words, his feelings were deeper. You false kings and false emperors, how dare you sleep with Zilong? Xie Zhen seemed to have discovered something, and it suddenly stimulated his back scales, and he immediately let out a roar. Suddenly, inscriptions of other colors appeared around the Jiashi Gate Ci. However, compared with the Jiashi Gate Ci written by the first emperor, these inscriptions seemed very frivolous, and could even be said to be completely incomparable. In the 12th year of Jianan in the Eastern Han Dynasty, Cao led his troops to conquer Wuhan in the east and returned triumphantly. He returned from the Liaxi corridor and passed through Jiashi, leaving behind steps out of Xiamen, which is the Jiashi chapter. Sima Yi, Emperor Xian of the Jin dynasty, attacked Gongsun Yuan. When passing through Changli, he climbed Jiashi mountain to pray for immortals and set up a monument to commemorate the achievements of the Qin emperor. When Emperor Yang of the Sui dynasty conquered Goryeo, he divided his troops out of Changli and climbed Jiashi mountain. In the spring of the 19th year, Li Shimin, Emperor Taizong of the Tang dynasty, personally went on an expedition to Korea. He passed by Jiashi and left a poem looking at the sea in spring. The waves have turned wild, and the green island has become mulberry. Zhifu misses the Han emperor, Jiashi misses the Qin emperor to record his merits. Under the roar of anger, all the soul marks left by generations of kings or figures comparable to kings and masters were wiped away. And dare to stand beside Zilong. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 929. Grass. The fat man cursed sadly, then retreated and separated from the formation of the Yin soldiers. After the fatty left their formation, the Yin soldiers did not have the slightest intention of revenge or punishment, but returned to normal and continued. They walked forward according to their previous rhythm. Gradually, the sight turned into a black mist, getting lighter and lighter until it was completely invisible. What's going on? Subai asked with some confusion. He was not angry that the fat man wanted to eat alone. If he didn't eat alone, would he still be called a fat man? On the contrary, Subai felt a sense of schadenfreude in his heart, because it could be clearly seen that the fat man had just become deflated. The Yin soldiers are looking for their way. This is the war spirit that died in ancient times and is still abiding by its duties in life. Sanjiang is actually seen as a circle, and the Lishan giant Buddha is a point in the circle. I can now roughly infer that those Yin Bing should have been Qin Bing during his lifetime. Tell me, Qin soldiers patrolled here 2,000 years ago and arranged these things. What was their purpose? I can see that too. I'm just curious about what you were planning to do just now. Subai didn't let the fat man avoid the important thing and succeed easily. What else could it be? I just want to sneak in and take a look. It's like reading a novel. What you have in front of you are words, but you can follow these words into the world it creates. This is called substitution. I just plan to use the breath condensing talisman to block my breath and sneak into their team, but the war thoughts of these Yin soldiers during their lifetime have not faded much even after thousands of years of death, so my talisman paper also supports not too long. This gang of underworld soldiers will come here once an hour. I have tried 3 times but failed. Hearing this, Subai finally understood what Fatty wanted to do. He had actually known it for a long time. All he understood was nothing more than the little juju deep in Fatty's heart. After all, I guess Fatty is a little scared, or it's just a habit. After all, the incident in Guangzhou Jinza left a big shadow on Fatty's heart. Moreover, one thing is very clear, that is, Fatty needs talisman paper to sneak into the team, but he does not even need talisman paper, because the aura on his body can make Qin eldest master Fusu feel friendly. If he deliberately leaks with Gu Zheng's aura, it shouldn't be difficult to fool these long-dead Yin soldiers. The fat man should have noticed this a long time ago, so he wanted to struggle. Subai reached out and patted the fat man on the shoulder. The two people looked at each other. You know. I understand too. The fat man then shouted with a mournful face, it's not fair. Subai did not sneak in eagerly. Instead, he and Fatty exited the formation first, sat down in a nearby tea house, ordered 2 cups of black tea and served some fruit plates. Half an hour later, Buddha and the monk also arrived. The monk was a little surprised at first why the fat man was in such a low mood. After Subai told the whole story, the monk finally understood. Indeed, the fat man seemed to be a bit different from Dabai. As long as the two of them were together, they would meet each other. When it comes to profitable things, the big head always seems to be eaten by Dabai, and the fat man can only helplessly drink soup beside him. Even if sometimes he has planned and prepared these things for a long time, in the end it is just a wedding dress. Everyone didn't mention this matter. The 4 people here were very pragmatic, so they immediately started discussing what to do next. One thing that didn't need to be discussed was that the task of sneaking into the Yin soldiers naturally fell into Subai's head was turned upside down because he had prerequisites that others did not have. As for myself and the other 3, they are specifically responsible for cooperating and maintaining the stability of that area. They are ready to respond to Subai when necessary. To put it bluntly, they are just a subordinate. After discussing it, the 4 of them left the tea house, re-entered the formation arranged by the fat man, and came to the white area again. Subai was sitting cross-legged in front and adjusting his breath, while Fatty and others were standing behind. Are you feeling unbalanced again? The monk asked. That's not true. I just think it's a bit evil. Fatty, I've looked away from it a long time ago. What Fatty said was true. This kind of thing happened so many times that he became a little numb. He didn't know about Subai before. It was easier for him to sneak into the Yin soldiers than himself, but he just wanted to try it on his own without believing in evil, but he still failed. Just look away. Don't run away from home again, the monk joked. Hey, monk, you are just a senior now. Being able to stand next to the 3 of us is already a compliment to you. How dare you kick your nose in the face? The fat man pretended to be angry and glared at the monk. He's almost there. In the story world just now, he almost tricked himself to death in order to achieve great mental perfection. But now he has basically succeeded. Maybe when you see him again in half a month, he may be in a better state than you. It's still high, Buddha interjected from the side. Higher than me? Directly to the intermediate level, the fat man was a little unbelievable. Can he actually jump to the next level? The more you accumulate, the less you gain, the monk humbled himself, but it didn't look like he was being modest. The fat man suddenly felt that the pressure was increasing again. Now it feels like a mass production. You are chasing after me. Haha, what happened here? In the past, would we have been so active and said nothing to satisfy our curiosity? I really can't say for sure. We may eventually choose to give up because of weighing the pros and cons. Buddha pointed around. He said, didn't you realize that we didn't even assess the possible risks involved in this matter? We came down without doing any risk assessment at all. After all, the atmosphere is different and the environment is different. Here we come. The monk interrupted the communication between the three of them. In the direction where his eyes were looking, a group of black mist was coming here. Subai also stood up, and the skin around his body began to show a light cyan halo, and the aura of ancient stiffness filled the air. This time, because of the previous experience, Subai seemed very calm. When the team passed by him, Subai walked directly into it. He did not choose to go to the end, but inserted himself into the middle of the team like the fat man before. Immediately, the team began to move forward. Gradually, Subai and these yin soldiers turned into black mist in the distance. Be prepared to respond, the monk reminded. Be prepared. After saying that, the monk and the fat man continued to check the formation together. Buddha was enjoying himself beside him, and even joked. Have you noticed that there are too many things left by the first emperor? The listeners of the past generations have probably disposed of a lot, but even in our generation, it seems that they can still be seen everywhere. The cunning rabbit has 3 holes. After the demise of the Ming dynasty, there was still the Heaven and Earth Society. After the National Army returned to Taiwan, it also left many spies on the mainland. As the defeated side, they all had big dreams of counterattack, so it is normal to leave some things behind. Fatty responded. Normal, the monk pondered. If you are facing other opponents from other countries, this is normal, but you must know that if you are facing a broadcaster, once you lose, will you be given a chance to come back? So, monk, why do you think the first emperor left so many back? I just met his eldest son, and it was so funny that he ran out of the seal because he fell in love with Dabai's body, and then after we had a big fight, he was taken care of by Boss Liang again. I was still looking forward to whether his appearance would cause a shock to the broadcast. At the worst, he would cause some trouble like the Su Yuhang couple did last time. This it's okay, but there is no fart reaction. The former eldest son of Daqin now looks a bit like the third Prince Zhu. He was really sealed into the ring by Boss Liang, the monk asked. Can I still have a holiday? When I eat bobo chicken, I still use the hand with the ring on it to eat? According to your point of view, why did he want to give up? Is it simply because the time to give up is close to the next time he enters the story world? This should be a hot potato, but Boss Liang gave him the man he loved. Don't you think it's strange? Give it to you, give it to Dabai, give it to Chen Guang, give it to who? And don't say that you are afraid that the one sealed inside is Fusu, so you don't dare to ask for it. When the fat man heard this, he narrowed his eyes and said, Hey, monk, I'm really surprised to hear you say that. The movements of the yin soldiers are very neat and boring, but they have a natural atmosphere that makes you immerse yourself subconsciously, like a group of people performing a religious ceremony together. Furthermore, Subai was also deliberately following the crowd, because his goal was to integrate into this gang of underworld soldiers, rather than play a game of everyone is drunk and I am alone. In a daze, all his actions began to become mechanical and numb. Subai tried his best to forget what he was doing now, and even began to deliberately ignore his own identity. He just had to seal his own memory, because there were monks and the others outside. Therefore, Subai was not very worried that he would be immersed and unable to get out. Furthermore, he also had strong confidence in his mental will. Woo! Suddenly, a long-range bugle sound sounded. Subai opened his eyes drowsily and found that on a hilltop in front of him, there was a row of sergeants holding something like horns and blowing the horns. Looking around, Subai saw that he was surrounded by Qin soldiers. He was no longer in a small team of Yin soldiers, but in the midst of a vast Qin army formation. A command arrow shot from afar, and in an instant, a stone stirred up thousands of waves. Tens of thousands of Qin soldiers in the entire military formation raised their weapons and smashed them heavily on the ground at their feet, shouting in unison. Strong wind! Strong wind! Strong wind! In the distance, a dragon chariot came from the sky. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 930. Qin Yang stood on the edge, looking at the scene in front of him. His breathing became faster subconsciously. With a wave of his hand, he erased the inscriptions left by the monarchs and princes for 2,000 years. This was a mysterious act that went beyond the level of traditional power attributes. After all, many of the inscriptions with inscriptions by monarchs and princes are no longer there. What has just appeared and been erased is actually the aura left by those people. Then he set up armies and troops to kill the unruly, and put an end to the rebels. The martial arts extinguished the violent rebels, the civil servants recovered their innocence, and the common people were convinced. Men enjoy their duties, women cultivate their careers, and everything is in order. Benefit from all properties, come to the fields together for a long time, no one will be uneasy. The ministers chanted the motto, "Please carve this stone and hang it with ceremony." The Jiashiman Ci describes the life achievements of the first emperor. Now, these words seem to have come alive and are beginning to tremble and twist. It seems that you can vaguely see the man who came here 2,000 years ago to look at the vast sea. Body shape. Unfilial Sun Fusu, please listen to me. Xie Zhen opened his hands, bowed and knelt down. Suddenly, the wind began to howl around the entire Jiashi mountain, and the temperature immediately cooled down. Fusu, Qin Yang heard this name. Could it be that the man in front of him was the eldest son of Qin state back then? That Fusu who was ordered to commit suicide by Zhao Jiajiao? Qin Yang thought this was a big joke, but who was so bored that he would run in front of him and make this joke? The person who can hide himself so well and make such a big deal must be at least a leader among high-level listeners. Is he just teasing me because he is too bored? However, there seemed to be no response to the great gift except for the gusts of cold wind, and a desolate atmosphere began to spread here. Ashes to dust, now only the remains of the great empire are left in rubble, and even the war spirits stored in the terracotta warriors and horses have disappeared. There was a trace of sadness on Xie Zhen's face, but there was not much sadness. His hands slowly spread on the ground, and with an indifferent and decisive attitude, he raised his hands from bottom to top, as if to support him. Holding something that cannot be seen or touched. Slowly, cracks began to appear on Xie Zhen's skin, and there were faint blood seeps out of the cracks, as if the body was about to collapse. When you travel to the countryside, you look like a bad person. Qin Yang felt that he was talking about this, and right now, wasn't he just watching the immortals playing chess? There are too many unknowns, too many things that I don't understand, but there is no way to solve the puzzles. I can only stand by and watch all this happen. Moreover, as the man in front of him who called himself Fusu gradually raised his hands, phantoms appeared all around, and reality and illusion began to intertwine. The modern buildings near Jiashi Mountain began to slowly disappear, replaced by a kind of desolation that seemed to return to ancient times. In the distance, there were vaguely visible pavilions and small buildings, giving it a dreamlike and misty feeling. In the illusion, Qin Yang saw an old man wearing a robe with white beard and hair slowly walking towards him. The old man was not wearing a Taoist robe, but it was very close to the style of a Taoist robe. Although he could not see the specific appearance of the old man clearly, but the earthly aura exuding from his body makes people unable to bear the slightest blasphemy. Xie Zhen's eyes were naturally open. He watched the old man slowly walking over, his eyes showing a kind of nostalgia for meeting his old friend, but the old man passed right through him. He can't see myself. Even him. Can't you see yourself too? Qin Yang saw that there seemed to be something else behind the old man, but the old man himself was already blurry enough, and the things behind him were naturally even more blurry and invisible. There seemed to be a black thing, like a coffin. The old man knelt down in front of the light and shadow of Jiashiman Ci, and opened his lips. He should be saying something, but the sound did not come out of the picture. Qin Yang subconsciously took a few steps forward. He instinctively wanted to obtain more information. Ordinary people are also curious, but for the audience, sometimes collecting this kind of information is already an instinct. Where did my father ask you to take them, to? Puff. A stream of blood immediately overflowed from the corner of Xie Zhen's mouth. The surrounding phantoms completely dissipated at this moment, as if nothing had ever existed. Jiaxi Mountain is still Jiaxi Mountain, and it is still located here as it was 2,000 years ago. Xie Zhen stood up unsteadily and covered his forehead with one hand. For some reason, Qin Yang felt that the pressure that the person in front of him had given him seemed to have disappeared just now. When his passenger turned around to face him, he immediately said, "I remember, you are the one who explained." In the audience circle, there are actually quite a few people who know each other. Especially as the circle becomes narrower and narrower as the strength increases, everyone can basically become acquaintances. Qin Yang has had contact with Xie Zhen. Furthermore, Xie Zhen's treatment of having a boss to support him made many people envious. "Help me find a quiet place to rest." Xie Zhen said very uncomfortably, "It's best if you can help me set up the formation, can you?" Qin Yang smiled bitterly and shook his head. "Contact the senior people who know formations nearby and ask them to come here. Damn it, you figured it out again, right? I want you to see who can refine who." Xie Zhen's eyes showed two completely different colors, and seemed to be engaged in an extremely fierce struggle, but at this time, his body seemed to have been drained of all strength and fell directly to the ground slumped. Qin Yang hesitated for a moment, then carried the gift down the mountain on his back. He had a vague feeling that what he saw today might be even more bizarre than what happened in the story world. Strong wind. Strong wind. Strong wind. Strong wind. The overwhelming sound of low shouts brought with it an overwhelming and chilling atmosphere. Subai, who was in the military formation, seemed to be in a melt. The surrounding atmosphere kept stimulating his soul, forcing him to merge into this. Among an army. This is no longer an army, but a war beast with a unified consciousness composed of individual soldiers. Here, everyone's thoughts will be gathered, infected, and forcibly united. A dragon chariot slowly came from the sky. Later emperors followed the example of the first emperor and claimed to be the true dragon emperor, and his own carriage became a dragon chariot. But what Subai saw at this time was a genuine five-clawed golden dragon acting as a horse. The character drags the chariot forward, but this five-clawed golden dragon is filled with a sense of death and is no longer as majestic as a dragon. The screen on the dragon chariot slowly spread out, and a man wearing a black dragon robe walked out. Subai had seen this man before in the memory of an ancient vampire. The first emperor, Zilong. Long live my emperor! Long live! Long live! In an instant, all the sergeants in the audience knelt down on one knee and shouted long live. Subai instinctively wanted to stand, but at this moment, it was as if tens of thousands of hands were pressing on him and forcing him to kneel down, causing Subai's body to collapse again. Unable to control himself, he knelt down on one knee. Now, Subai was in a state of confusion, similar to half-dreaming, but Subai felt that if he was fully awake but his body was here, he would not have much capital to resist. This was a general trend, a kind of general trend. An extremely terrifying aura, or it can be said to be the power of a true dragon. Xiaolong was standing above, his eyes scanning below. Subai wanted to look up and take a look at the first emperor. Curious. Chasing stars. To pay homage. Zone was probably full of emotions, but Subai just couldn't raise his head. Subai didn't know what it felt like when Huben, whose strength was equivalent to that of tens of thousands of high-level listeners, knelt in front of him. Subai didn't know, and even, didn't dare to think about it. Next, there was a long silence. Tens of thousands of tigers were still kneeling on one knee, but the ancestral dragon above them never spoke, let alone let everyone stand up. There was silence all around, and you could hear a pin drop. Subai's face was covered with sweat. This majestic pressure and suffocation made him feel at a loss. At first, Chen Ryu had said that he could help Subai suppress his newly advanced spirit, but Chen Ryu's methods were different from the current situation. Compared with this scene, it was completely unattainable. There was no need to fight at all. I had been so wrapped up in the general trend that my confidence and good feeling as a high-level audience were completely destroyed. Silence, 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 still silence. Subai's breathing began to become more and more rapid, and the pressure began to approach his critical point. He knew that once he could no longer support it, the state he entered with the Yin soldiers would collapse. If he collapses, how will he tell Fatty Monk Buddha and the others later? Could it be that you worked hard to get in, kowtowed to the emperor and then came out satisfied? Jijiao Lao Qin, we will fight against the national calamity together. Finally, Xiao Long spoke, and his voice seemed to have a special magic power that could penetrate your eardrums and directly shock your heart. Jiju, Lao Qin, fight against the national calamity together. There will be no truce until the blood is shed dry. Tens of thousands of tigers shouted together, and everyone had a bloodthirsty eagerness in their eyes. Zalong's face was a little sad, but he still took out a sword hanging on the outside of the dragon chariot and stabbed the five-clawed golden dragon at his feet. The five-clawed golden dragon let out a weak cry, and then, the dragon's blood began to spill out. It seemed like blood was raining from the sky, dripping on the soldiers below. Jijiao Lao Qin, we will fight against the national calamity together. We will fight until the blood is shed dry. At this moment, Subai found that the soldiers around him had stood up, and while shouting war songs, they raised their weapons and thrust them into the bodies of their comrades. The entire military formation. At this time, it seemed to have turned into a terrifying Shura field. What exactly is going on? A wisp of hot blood splashed onto Subai's face, causing Subai's vision to turn scarlet, but the crazy killings around him were far from over. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiao Long. Chapter 931. Sunshine, beach, breeze, coffee, this is a very pleasant combination. A man with a sickly white complexion is lying on a bench, wearing a pair of sunglasses on his face, as if he has fallen asleep. This is a beach that only belongs to him. The ocean is an area that humans have not completely conquered and covered. It is indeed not difficult to find an uninhabited island here, and some islands sometimes sink. It goes to the bottom of the sea and then comes to the surface again after a few years. Suddenly, a wave almost 20 stories high rose up on the sea in front. It was like a vicious beast with a huge mouth and it was swallowing the side, even the sunlight was blocked. The man on the bench seemed to be unaware of it and was still dozing off. Finally, the waves reached the shore, but suddenly faded away, leaving only a huge bubble on the shore. There were 8 people standing in the bubble. The leader was a blue-haired young man with a pair of amber eyes. Like texture. Hiles, you are so laid back. The blue-haired young man walked towards the side while rubbing his wrists. There was a lot of food placed next to Hill's bench, and the coconuts alone were piled half as high as a person. Not treating himself as an outsider, the blue-haired young man took a straw and inserted it directly into the coconut, and drank the coconut water by himself. The 7 people who came with the blue-haired young man stood there neatly, and one of them looked to be Asian. "Maskell, is your life too boring, so you come to disturb my peace?" Hills took off his sunglasses and complained to the blue-haired young man next to him with some dissatisfaction. "Haha, haven't you spent enough time in the land of the living dead, the place of enlightenment? After finally getting out, you unexpectedly came to an uninhabited island in the ocean alone." "I have been looking for it for a long time." Masher stretched out his hand. He was lazy, looked around, and found that there was only one bench here, so he simply sat on the ground, threw away the empty coconut in a very shameless manner, and shamelessly picked up a new one and continued drinking. "My business is my business." Hill seemed a little helpless to this guy, and he was too lazy to say anything more. "You should know that the old palace of the Macedonian Empire was moved away, right?" Masher seemed to be planning to get to the point at this time. "Would you believe me if I told you that my next-door neighbor's dad moved it?" Hills asked. "It's like when I was a kid and a classmate bragged to us that David Beckham lived next door to him. Then we have nothing to talk about." Hills put on his sunglasses again, as if he was planning to sleep again. "Don't worry, I also made an appointment with Carrie. He will probably be here soon." Masher fetched the third coconut. "You still called him?" Hills, lying on the bench, sneered. "What on earth are you going to do?" "We discovered something. Because of the appearance and removal of the ancient palace, some sealed historical materials were proven to be correct. Records that were originally thrown into the trash were rediscovered. As a result, there were some special what a discovery." Masher seemed to want to deliberately use a provocative tone to arouse Hill's interest, but Hills was like a salted fish, not even willing to turn over. "Then just go with Carrie." "What do you need me to do?" Hills said lazily. "I'm not interested in forming an Indiana Jones alliance with you. That place has a very powerful formation. Aren't you also an array mage? But those formations are of the Eastern type. Hills, you know it yourself. In the entire Western audience circle, there are very few formations that can rival the two of us. But among them, you are still interested in Dongfang." "I know those things very well, so I really have to ask you to do me a favor this time. Aren't you curious?" "I..." Before Hills could speak, a heat wave suddenly blew in the distance, and a burning phoenix swept from the sea. The 7 senior people on the shore were all standing in the bubbles, and Hills and Marschell was blessed by his own power instinct, so it was no big deal, but this originally lush island almost seemed to have been bombed by gasoline bombs, turning it into a bare dead island. The fire phoenix transformed into the figure of a boy in the air. The boy was wearing a jersey similar to that of Arsenal. "Carrie, you definitely did it on purpose," Hills said angrily. "There is no other way. If I want to ask you for a favor, I have to do something extraordinary." Carrie walked up to him, took a coconut himself, and took a straw from Masher. "I won't give in." Hills jumped off the bench. "I don't believe you dare to burn every island in the ocean like this. If it doesn't work, I will go to an island with many tourists to see if you dare to burn it. Burn all the living people there." "Hiles, what are you avoiding?" Carrie asked while sipping coconut water. "You seem to know something we don't know, otherwise it would be really hard for me to understand the reason for your current decadence." "What do I know?" Hills shrugged, looking like I was going crazy. "Didn't I already explain it in a post on the website? If the 3 of us are in, if you become enlightened at this time, there is still a certain probability that you can survive, or that you can live in another place for a while. But unless these people are geniuses, they are destined to be cleared away like garbage in 2 years." Hills pointed at the 7 seniors still standing in the bubble and said. These 7 seniors immediately became very ugly, but due to the identity and strength of the person in front of them, no one dared to take offense. "Hey, there is another Asian here. You remind me of a friend. He is Chinese. What about you? Are you Chinese, Japanese, or Korean?" The young man with yellow skin and black hair who was named by Hills responded at this time, "Sir, I am Chinese." "Oh, he's also Chinese. Do you know a guy named Subai? Hills asked casually. Subai? Gu Fan was stunned for a moment. He was a little confused at this time, but he still nodded and said, I know him. He is a very good friend of mine. He has been playing since childhood. You lied. Hills frowned and said firmly, if you were his friend, you would definitely describe him like this when talking about him. That bastard who is selfish, self-righteous, and totally self-centered. Like me, that's how I see him. Gu Fan. The surroundings were filled with misty white air. The fat man and the monk continued to observe the formation in front of them, while the Buddha sat cross-legged and meditated. They didn't think anything would happen to Subai. After all, this was just a dream by a yin soldier. If he were an ordinary person, he would probably get so caught up in it that he would forget who he was. In fact, many people suffered sudden strokes or died suddenly. Because he met the yin soldiers, his soul was followed along without him knowing it. But Subai is not an ordinary person. When it comes to willpower, even a monk has to be ashamed of himself. Furthermore, Subai's body and soul are now bound together and have completely merged into one. This is like what women like to say about controlling a man's heart and controlling his stomach. Now he wants to abduct Subai. Bai, you have to take your stomach and heart away together, which is undoubtedly much more difficult. For this reason, the fat man and the monk didn't really take it seriously at first, but their professionalism was there after all. Although they were a little absent-minded, they still made the necessary observations. At the moment, judging from the feedback from the formation, Subai should be in a nervous mood, and the ball of colorful thread in front of the fat man began to tremble non-stop. It seems that Dabai was frightened by Zalong's pressure. Ha ha ha, Fatty said gloatingly, to be honest, Fatty, I haven't met the emperor yet. There are still many royal families in Europe, but they are gone in China. Even if we push forward more than 100 years, few of the last emperors in the late Qing dynasty had the spirit of a true dragon. It doesn't matter whether they look at it or not, said the monk. Oh, what a pity. Even if I just saw the memory picture, I really want to know what Zalong looks like. Hey, monk, do you think my butt is crooked? When Fusu fought with us before, we regard them as scum, similar to the Japanese puppet army. At that time, there were many young people in Western Europe who worshipped Che Guevara. This kind of thing actually has little to do with the camp, the monk said with emotion. The poor monk also yearned for him very much. Just as the two of them were talking, the flower thread in front of them suddenly stopped moving. Huh? This thing has stopped moving, and Dabai's heart has stopped. The fat man smacked his mouth. It's so calm, similar to the state a man is in after he trembles. The monk's expression suddenly changed. He suddenly spread his hands and recited a mantra. Next moment, the originally motionless flower thread suddenly ignited spontaneously, and the formation began to shake as well, possibly collapsing at any time. I'm so hummed, what kind of plane is this? The fat man immediately bit the tip of his tongue, spit out a mouthful of blood from the tip of his tongue, and began to press it down on the palm of his hand. This formation was arranged by him and the monk to connect to Subai's side. It is equivalent to the rope that Subai returned from the memory borrowed by the yin soldiers. There must be no accidents, especially now that there are signs of accidents. The monk took out the Buddhist beads and recited Buddhist scriptures. Buddha light appeared all around and began to further bless the formation. But in the sky above the formation, a golden shadow suddenly appeared. The majestic dragon's power pressed down, causing the fat man and the monk to turn pale, and blood began to overflow from their eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. Damn it, how could there be a dragon in the dream, and a 5-clawed golden dragon? The fat man cursed. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyaolong. Chapter 932. Amitabha. A Buddha's call came from behind the fat man and the monk, and Buddha, who had been sitting cross-legged in meditation before, took action. In fact, no matter how powerful he was in trance, he would not be able to avoid being alarmed at this moment. It was actually the sudden appearance of the five-clawed golden dragon. The noise created was indeed too great. The Buddha released wisps of black aura, like an evil ghost coming out of the underworld, but it was protected by Buddhist teachings. The incarnations of Buddha and the devil were perfectly intertwined in him, from the devil to the Buddha, and from the Buddha again. Save the devil. This look is quite handsome. The fat man wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and said, I've never seen this pose before. This is the Dharma body. That dragon is a phantom. It doesn't even have a soul. It's best to use the Dharma body to deal with it, the monk explained as he began to rebuild the formation. Rebuild the formation. Something must have happened there. You can't let Dabai fall in there alone. The fat man nodded, suppressed the boiling energy and blood in his body and began to rebuild the magic circle, but he still asked again, Monk, what does your magic body look like? Jin Shanzi. The monk ignored Fatty, and after reconstructing the formation, he left the following consolidation to Fatty. He began to explore Sudbai's aura again, intending to re-establish contact. The battle between Buddha and the golden dragon's shadow was not too flashy. In fact, it couldn't be too flashy. The reason why the fat man and the monk seemed to be injured before was because their minds were connected with the formation. Through this connection, the appearance of the golden dragon shook the formation to hurt them both. In fact, this golden dragon died more than 2,000 years ago. It only exists in a memory and does not exist in this plane at all. It is somewhat equivalent to a computer virus, which only damages the computer but does not cause any harm to the person sitting in front of the computer. Like catching fireflies, Buddha burned out the tiny ray of dragon power, then returned to normal and walked to the fat man and the monk. What happened? Buddha asked. A little careless, haha. The monk actually smiled. The poor monk is now very curious about what kind of scene Dabai saw through the Yin soldiers, and it can actually cause such a big shock. The poor monk has reunited with Dabai. Now that we have established a connection, there should be no problem this time. After saying that, the monk pressed his prayer beads on the formation, and the fat man also stabbed his natal peachwood sword here. Together, the two of them pressed magical weapons that were comparable to their natal weapons on the formation to prevent what just happened again. It seems that things are more interesting than expected. Foye sat down next to him again. I am really looking forward to Dabai coming back soon and telling me the story. But Sudbai, who was in the interesting story at this time, didn't find it interesting at all. The military formation that had been peaceful just now had completely turned into a Shura battlefield. Killing and being killed seemed to be the only theme at this time. But Sudbai didn't understand what was going on. Although these tens of thousands of Qin troops could not be said to be the entire strength of the Qin army at this time, they were definitely a backbone force. At the moment, the first emperor above his head was like this: just sit back and watch your soldiers kill each other here? In fact, the five-clawed golden dragon that gave people a feeling of being sick and dying from the moment it flew over was probably not the vehicle of the first emperor, but more like a captured prey. According to historical records, the Yellow Emperor was a Tude, and the Xia dynasty was a Mu. As for virtue, Shang is the virtue of gold, the Zhou dynasty is the virtue of fire, and the Qin dynasty is the virtue of water. At the beginning of the Han dynasty, Qin's water virtue was continued. Emperor Wu of the Han dynasty responded to the soil virtue, and Lu Xiu began to respond to the fire virtue after the founding of the country. Therefore, if the first emperor wanted to find his own car, he should choose the black dragon, not the golden dragon. But the blood of this golden dragon became a catalyst, making the Qin soldiers below become crazy and hysterical. Powerful energy fluctuations are constantly venting in the surroundings, and the terrifying momentum of landslides is created here. The strength of each of these soldiers is unusual. The fighting of tens of thousands of people seems like countless missiles collectively falling here. Confused, unknown. As well as the bloodlust and killing that seemed to be infected by him, Subai gradually began to lose himself. He stood up slowly, and then looked at the Changji he held in his right hand. Immediately, Subai swung it and stabbed directly at the Qin soldier in front of him. Puff. Changji penetrated his body, which made Subai a little unexpected. He was a little confused, whether he was really in the ancient battlefield of that era, or whether his Yin soldiers took advantage of the passage and merged into one of the soldiers. In the mental state, it seems impossible for him to actually kill people now, because he is just a bystander, not a participant, but he feels that he is completely involved now, waving the weapon constantly moving the weapon, stabbing into the bodies of one robe after another. The blood was splattering, the body was breaking, and Subai became more and more skilled in killing after the initial suffering and struggle. The bloodthirst and madness had completely immersed his reason, just like before him. It is not his colleagues, but the enemy chiefs who are enemies of the empire and enemies of the ancestral dragon. Kill. 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 Subai knew that something was wrong with this state, but he had no ability to change him. He had become more and more integrated into the scene, as if it was his own memory, and as if this memory was what was happening. As the killing began, Subai felt that his body was getting stronger and stronger. The flesh and blood of the former Bas merged into his body, turned into nutrients, and began to nourish himself continuously. This is like raising gu, or a redistribution of resources. Tens of thousands of Qin soldiers are like a large circle of poisonous insects. They are biting, they are devouring, they are getting stronger, and at the same time, they are also giving. Subai felt that his eyes were getting wet, killing, killing. There are fewer and fewer people. Fewer and fewer. The mania and madness at the beginning were slowly fading away, and the killing action seemed to be just a mechanical habit, an instinct, and an inertia. You can't get the slightest pleasure or achievement from killing, and when you see more and more stumps on the ground, a desolate atmosphere begins to surround you. In the sky, the ancestral dragon stood silently. The five-clawed golden dragon seemed to have completely lost its life, but its body was still floating in the sky. Its huge body looked no different from a rootless duckweed at this time. Xiaolong's hands were trembling slightly, but this tremor was hidden under his black dragon robe. He had faced scenes countless times more tragic than this, but now this scene made him the most heartache. A gentle young man walked up to Xiaolong, and beside him stood a general. Xiaolong nodded, as if agreeing to the young man's request. The young man held the flute and began to play the song "The Soul Returns." This is a scene that cannot be recorded in history books, and it is also a scene that is destined to be incomprehensible to future generations, but it really happened. The same room was fighting, helpless, painful, frustrated, angry, all kinds of emotions are constantly intertwined and swirling, making people feel as if a huge mountain is weighing on their hearts, making it difficult to breathe. Subai has forgotten who he is. He is just killing repeatedly. If he doesn't kill others, others will kill him. There is no choice at all. Finally, when the number of people standing around reduced to a certain number, everyone subconsciously stopped killing. There were about 500 people who survived, and tens of thousands of soldiers. Only 500 people were left, and each of them was covered in blood. They carry a monstrous evil spirit, and each of them has extremely strong qi and blood. It is no exaggeration to say that these 500 people are the essence of this tens of thousands of troops. Fusu stopped playing. He seemed to be afraid to look directly at the tragic scene below. He was confused, hesitant, and helpless. He didn't know why his father did this. All these were following his father. His consolidated army, which had conquered the 6 kingdoms in the north and south, was now almost all buried here. Meng Tian on the side stretched out his hand and grabbed Fu Su's shoulder. Fu Su tried to resist, but failed. He was eventually forced back into the dragon chariot by Meng Tian. Zilong stepped down and fell down. The 500 soldiers who had been killing people just now almost completely followed their instincts and knelt down towards Zilong in front of them. Zilong walked past each of them, like a review, but the broken limbs and bones scattered all over the mountains and plains around them did not create any joyful atmosphere. When Zilong walked in front of him, Subai clearly noticed that the person in front of him seemed to pause. For a moment, a feeling of being completely seen through his heart came over him, but it seemed that there was only this moment of pause. Zilong the dragon moved on to the next person. In the distance, there was a noise of carriages and horses. A white-haired old man dressed as a warlock came slowly. Behind the old man stood many boys and girls. They pushed the carriage and followed them all the way. On the carriage were placed a black coffin. The old man walked to Zilong and bowed to say hello. Zilong turned his back, and the two seemed to be communicating something. Finally, Zilong nodded. The old man stood up, holding a bunch of paper talismans in his hand. He walked up to a Qin soldier and put the paper talisman on the Qin soldier's forehead. The Qin soldier immediately fell down and became unconscious. The boys and girls on standby stretched out their hands to lift the Qin soldier and put him into the coffin. These boys and girls had talisman paper stuck behind them, which was somewhat similar to the yellow scarf warriors refined by Taoist priests in later generations. So it's very powerful. The old men stuck them over one by one. It seemed that because of Zilong, no soldier resisted. They fell down one by one because of the talisman stickers, and one by one they were transported into the coffin and sealed by the boys and girls. Finally, the old man came to Subai. He picked up the talisman, but suddenly paused. Then, a suspicious smile appeared on his face, but his movements did not stop. The hand holding the talisman began to move to Subai's forehead. Subai suddenly felt a huge sense of crisis in his heart. It seems that if this talisman paper is pasted, then no matter who you are, no matter where, no matter what identity or medium you enter here, he will eventually be completely sealed. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 933. How is the situation? Qin Yang, who was standing outside the house, asked directly when he saw the group coming out. These 5 people were notified by Qin Yang. They are all seniors who know some formations or have some attainments in formations. But now they only have a wry smile on their faces. This matter is really beyond the scope of their strength and others. Well, fortunately, that adult was also a reasonable person. Even though they couldn't help, he still gave each of them a magic weapon. Normally, they would not have the opportunity to come into contact with people at the level of senior listeners, but this time once, this adult gave them a feeling of spring breeze. Qin Yang nodded without saying anything, watching the 5 people walking towards the elevator entrance, and he opened the door and walked in. Xie Zhen was lying on the bed in the hotel, looking very depressed, but Qin Yang knew that Xie Zhen at this time should be normal, because he did not feel the oppressive sense of status from the other party. That feeling, it is more terrible than the oppression of a senior person by a senior listener. When talking about the view of history, the Chinese like to use Chen Sheng and Wu Guang's princes, generals, and ministers are very different to show that they are very different from Western history. But in fact, some things that are imprinted in the bones of human nature will not change. It's just a different way of explanation. There is really no need to say much about Fu Su's bloodline. Although that era was buried, some things flowing in his bones have not been completely wiped out. The fear of facing the true superiors of the past still exists. Of course, the most critical reason is that Qin Yang is not an advanced listener now. Otherwise, Once the advanced listener's life level is further improved, this sense of oppression will naturally be reduced a lot. Since calling them is useless, why do you want me to call them here just to try my luck? Qin Yang asked with some confusion. A wry smile appeared on the corner of Ji Zhen's mouth. He could only smile back now because he had tried to contact his boss but received no reply. He didn't believe that his boss didn't know what was in the ring. There is a hidden crisis, and even Xie Zhen has a feeling that his boss must have guessed his current situation, and all this is his arrangement. A feeling of betrayal by a loved one washed over Xie Zhen's body and mind. This was a kind of silent bitterness, but Xie Zhen didn't have too much to think about. After all, it was not like he had never betrayed his boss before, even if he had beaten him at that time. In the name of love. They can't leave, Xie Zhen said weakly. At the same time, the bodies of the 5 seniors who had just entered the elevator suddenly trembled, and then their eyes began to become dull. Before the elevator door closed, they stretched out their hands to block the elevator, and then walked out one after another. Walked into this room again. Is there something wrong with the magic weapon you gave them? Qin Yang asked. Haha, you have still reduced the gap between advanced listeners and veterans. I want to make them confused for a while. It is a very simple thing and does not require so much effort. After saying that, Ji Zhen looked at the ring on his left ring finger, sighed, and said. You can choose any one of these 5 people. If you continue to want to control my body, then don't blame me for choosing the last ditch. Anyway, if nothing else happens, I am also a dying person, and I have no excuses. Not going out. After Ji Zhen said these words, his eyes suddenly turned dark red, and the pressure that made Qin Yang feel his scalp numb appeared again. You are the one who likes me. You have no choice, obviously. The owner of this body has changed again. Ji Zhen got off the bed, looked at Qin Yang, smiled and said, take me to that place. Where, when the man in front of him smiled and spoke to him, Qin Yang suddenly felt a feeling of honor welling up deep in his heart. This was a very shameful feeling, but Qin Yang couldn't control it. Keep yourself in mind, as if the other party treats you with false words, you must die for the confidant. There is a mirror in a place. I don't know if you know that place. If you don't know, I will have to spend some time looking for it. He can still occupy this body again in about 10 hours. Mirror, Qin Yang seemed to suddenly think of something and said, is it at the bottom of the sea? I remember that Subai and Fatty had been here before. At that time, there were several other groups of people, and they went into the sea and into a cave together. Have you gone to the bottom of the sea? Xie Zhen's eyes revealed a hint of reminiscence. It's really a sea of change. Ah. The fat man clutched his natal flying sword with both hands. This flying sword pierced here and was regarded as the eye of the magic circle. But at the moment, the eye of the magic circle was obviously in a state of uncertainty, as if it was in a state of uncertainty. There is a will that is driving it, and that will is naturally not the fat man's own. Your mother is so stinky, here she comes again. Didn't Dabai just have a dream? Never have I ever seen Yin soldiers take advantage of this and be so fierce. Fatty's face turned red, and 3 purple talismans flew out and stuck on the flying sword. These were the talismans that Fatty pressed at the bottom of the box. This kind of purple talisman is difficult for even Fatty to draw now. It was successfully forged by chance and a large amount of resources. Yes, forged. This is not a talisman at all. It can be regarded as a magic weapon, but this magic weapon is a one-time consumable. But at this time, Fatty couldn't bear to leave it. If he left Dabai there, he would really be in big trouble. The monk is still sitting there cross-legged, but there is a shadow in front of and behind him. From a distance, it seems that there are 3 monks, and the monk's aura is constantly fluctuating at this time. Obviously, the monk is also fighting hard this time. I am trying my best to protect this formation. There has been an accident before, and it must not happen this time. Because both the fat man and the monk who built this formation sensed it, if the formation collapsed unexpectedly again this time, then Dabai would probably not be able to come back. Ridiculous. It's really funny. But why did the Damien soldiers' excuse have such a big impact? Even a highly educated monk had a little anger coming out of his eye sockets at this time, which was regarded as breaking the precept. Buddha didn't know the formation, so he couldn't help much. This time, no golden dragon phantom appeared. He could only stand aside and watch the fat man and the monk working so hard that their heads were almost smoking. But soon, Buddha's idle state was ended, because he saw a talisman paper appearing some distance in front of the foreheads of the fat man and the monk, and an old hand could be vaguely seen behind the talisman paper. The fat man and the monk also had expressions of surprise on their faces. Who the hell is this pervert? He sensed us through time and space and wants to put a spell on both of us. The talisman paper in front of him was getting closer and closer. Subai had no doubt that once he was affixed with this talisman paper, he would fall into a deep sleep. At that time, those boys and girls would place him in the coffin. Then, where to go? Going to Japan? Yes, if Subai still can't guess the identity of the old man in front of him, then he can really kill him with a piece of tofu. The first emperor, the boy and girl, and another supporting role, of course, is Sufu. It is said that the first emperor ordered Sufu to go eastward to find the elixir of immortality, but then it disappeared. Then, there is a more popular legend that Sufu brought 500 boys and girls to Japan, and then founded the country there and became the leader of the Japanese people. Ancestors, and because the Japanese royal family does not allow archaeologists to excavate the tombs of their ancestors, some truths can only remain buried. But Subai didn't think that Sufu was going to Japan, not counting boys and girls, and bringing 500 evil stars who had just survived the killing of tens of thousands of soldiers, just to go to Japan and become king. Doesn't this look down upon the bunch of indigenous monkeys on the Japanese island? Would a monarch as talented and strategic as the first emperor be deceived by Sufu and let him go overseas to live freely after paying such a huge price? Moreover, nowadays, for those who have power beyond ordinary people in this world, the world is so big that there is no place for you at all. The purpose of the arrival of radio is to castrate the power of this world and change it. The attributes of the plane, so they are destined to become the objects of broadcast cleaning. Sufu's eyes had a dark yellow luster, and it could be vaguely seen that his pupils were divergent, as if they couldn't focus at all, but it gave Subai the feeling that he was looking at him, and that was not what he was looking at. Named Qin Bing, but looking at himself behind Qin Bing. Illusion, reality. The Yin soldiers took advantage of an illusion. Memories, past, future, present. Many things kept colliding in Subai's mind. He could no longer distinguish between true and false. He couldn't even understand why the scene happened. This is fundamental. No logic. But Subai was not willing to wait for death here. When Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiao treated him like this, he was not defeated. Now, how could he bow his head? Subai's originally slightly panicked eyes began to calm down at this moment. He began to call the physical body of Qin Bing where he was. Subai didn't know if he was looking at a period of history from the other party's perspective, but since people in the past can affect him now, so there is no reason for me not to be able to influence people in the past. Sufu's hand slid down very slowly because he felt a resistance, which was caused by the fat man and the monk almost fighting to death. Sufu was also surprised by the calmness of the man in front of him. This Qin soldier's mental fluctuations seemed to have undergone extremely complex changes, as if he were a normal person suffering from epilepsy. Pick up your gun. Pick up your gun. Resist. Resist. Resistance.